we will get started. So thank you everybody for joining this session. General rules, please keep yourself muted while the presentation is going on. If you have any questions, we can address those in the chat box, and speakers will be invited to speak and unmute themselves. There are many people on this call, so please respect each other's space. Make sure you are allowing people the time to speak and respect the given time. If you're using the chat, do not hesitate to introduce yourself and feel free to rename yourself during the call. We're also going to be using Slido polls throughout this presentation, so we will keep the link to the Slido in the chat. So what is Youth for Nature? Youth for Nature is the organization that is hosting this session today. We were founded in 2019 and have since then built a robust and growing network of active youth leaders and have gained national recognition for our work. We are a youth-led international organization that educates, empowers, and mobilizes young people to lead on and advocate for solutions to the ecological and climate crises that are ambitious, backed by science and community, and grounded in justice. We envision a future where humans and nature are resilient and thriving together in harmony. So I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Emma Thornton. I am based in Boston in the United States. I've been working with Youth for Nature since 2019, and my current capacity at the organization is the Private Sector Task Force Lead. And I am very excited to chat with you all today and have a really great discussion about private sector ambition and how we can move forward on the nature and climate crises. And pleased to introduce Giulia as well.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Giulia. I'm calling from France in Paris, and I'm a global ambassador at Youth for Nature. I joined Youth for Nature now since November after my master's degree. I'm volunteering there and volunteering with the private sector session and the policy task force as well. And I'm very happy to welcome you here and being able to start this wonderful dialogue all together.
First, before we officially start speaking, we wanted to do a quick icebreaker. So if you look at the screen, our question is, which animal describes your mood today? And we'll post the link to the Slido in the chat box. So you could go ahead and click on that link and let us know which animal best describes your mood today. Is it number 1, a sleeping baby owl? Number 2, an ant? Number 3, migratory birds? Number 4, an invincible tardigrade? Or number 5, a whale navigating the abyss of the earth? We can see the results coming in through Slido. If you give your answer, it starts to give some results. We have about 40% of people who feel like a whale navigating the abyss of the earth. So it's very exciting. Looks like everything else is about even at the moment. Next is migratory birds. Looks like everybody's trying to seek a warm winter, trying to go south, or north, I guess, if you're already in the southern hemisphere. I definitely can understand that. Okay, moving on, I'll pass the mic over to Giulia to start to talk about what we consider when we talk about the private sector.
Yes, thank you, Emma. So first of all, when we talk about private sector, we need to consider what is the private sector. It's a really broad notion, and in economics, it is generally used to describe the part of an economy in which the government has little or no involvement at all. And it is contrasted with the public sector, which is mainly run by the state. The private sector includes private companies. It can include banks with private capital, the social economy, including mutuals, cooperative and associations of non-governmental organizations. In most free economies, the private sector makes up a big portion of the economy. It is supposedly legally ruled by governments. Here, when we talk about private sector, we will mainly talk about companies and the business sector because it's a huge part of the private sector, even though considering that the public sector can own some big company or partly own them. And we can talk about different subsectors such as agriculture, finance, mining, media, communications, etc. And among all this private sector, we have the SMEs, which is the main part of all the businesses that employs the majority of workers in the world. So they have a very huge social impact. The private sector has a great impact on humans' livelihood by providing food, goods, and participating in the global economy. And the first communities that are positively or negatively impacted by the private sector actions are women, children, and the indigenous people. It's really important to have this in mind because these people are also less likely to be part of the decision-making processes involving the private sector. All private sector and many businesses rely on nature, which is directly or indirectly. For instance, businesses have direct production through agriculture, but also directly employees depends on nature. So indirectly, businesses and the well-being of the private sector depend on the well-being of nature through their employees. So it's really important to have this in mind. And as one of the main actors of the global and local economy, the private sector is really impacted by the current crisis we have, which is the economic crisis, the climate change, and the biodiversity loss. Next slide, please, Emma. So first, let's talk a little bit about some key data to show us the urge to act and why the private sector is really important. On Monday, there was a new report released by 738 economy specialists that say that it costs less for the economy to act for climate change adaptation and mitigation rather than doing nothing. And by nothing, we mean business as usual. They estimated that keeping business as usual regarding climate change will get the economy to be damaged by $1,700 billion over the year by 2025, which is really huge. And so we know that to keep the world's current living standards, it will require 1.6 Earths right now. And if the global south will reach the same way of living as the global north, we will need more than 3 Earths to keep going through that. And also what is really interesting is that the Gupta review published earlier this year in 2021, which is a really big economic report that we have to change. It says that we have to change our patterns of consumption, such as increasing the investments in nature-based solutions or changing our individual and also our global behavior, which include the private sector and all the stakeholders that are related.
We also wanted to give a bit of background on nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions are defined by the IUCN as actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, simultaneously providing benefits to human well-being and biodiversity. Nature-based solutions, such as the restoration of forests, grasslands, and wetlands, or sustainable land management activities, can provide governments with effective, long-term, and cost-efficient measures to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And then following that, a groundbreaking study led by the Nature Conservancy found that natural climate solutions, which are nature-based solutions that specifically focus on addressing climate change mitigation, actually have the potential to provide 37% of cost-effective CO2 mitigation needed through 2030 for greater than a 2/3 chance of keeping warming below 2 degrees. So natural climate solutions are providing so much of the solution that'll keep us below 2. The importance of nature to tackle climate change was also confirmed within the IPCC Special Report on Land that was published in August of 2019. And please make sure that you're not writing on the presentation. We have room in the Slido for participation and then also in the chat. The importance of nature to tackle climate change was confirmed within the IPCC's Special Report on Land, published in August 2019. And the report provided a comprehensive overview of the interconnections on the climate crisis, land, food, and sustainable development from a science-based lens. The majority of nature-based solutions can also offer a suite of additional benefits that aid in climate adaptation, including flood buffering, improving soil health and ecosystem biodiversity, and enhancing climate resilience. However, the role that nature can play in climate action is often not recognized in discussion or funding, unfortunately. So then moving into an opportunity to connect with us, what word comes into your mind when thinking about the private sector and nature? So this is another opportunity to open up Slido and give us your thoughts. And Giulia posted the link into the chat, so thank you for that. And when you add your thought into the poll, it creates a word cloud. So as we have more people coming in and responding with their words, we have more and more words coming up. And it's really interesting. So far, we have the two largest words, which means the most people who have added them, are exploitation and resilience. So that's really interesting because you can sort of think of those on opposite ends of the spectrum sometimes. We also see responsibility coming up, disconnected, partnership. Extraction, money, collaboration. Yeah, we have a lot of interesting words coming up. Yeah, thank you all for sharing your thoughts. It's really great to be able to connect with you as we go through this presentation. And then the next part of the session is going to be our first roundtable. So that's very exciting. We're going to be able to connect with all of our great speakers, and Giulia will be leading this roundtable. So I will pass it off to her.
Yeah, thank you. So starting this first roundtable, we will welcome 5 speakers that will talk about the private sector and nature. The first speaker is Jonas. Jonas, so we first want to hear you about what do you think is the best way to engage with companies and stakeholders on issues of sustainability, and if you can please share with us your expertise on what you're doing as being a consultant at Gaia Consulting. You have the floor, Jonas, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, Giulia. I hope you can see and hear me now. So yeah, as an answer to your question, I'll come back to it during my short presentation. So hi everyone, my name is Jonas and I work at Gaia Consulting in Helsinki, Finland. And my job is to work with public and private organizations to plan, develop, coordinate, and assess their sustainability work, for example, in the fields of energy, circular economy, and sustainable business operations in general. And previously, I've worked also in 2 municipalities as the climate coordinator. So I'll discuss about stakeholder engagement during my presentation, and especially in the private sector as we're discussing it now. And this is just a scratch of the surface, and I'll be happy to answer more questions later also, and during the roundtable. So a stakeholder engagement in the first place is a process by which companies communicate and get to know their stakeholders. And it usually entails some type that the stakeholders have a possibility to influence the company's direction. And here you can see like internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. Internal ones are inside the company, employees, management, for example, and external ones, let's say outside, not working in the company, so shareholders, suppliers, politicians, society, local communities also. Here in the middle, you can see that there's different methods to engage your stakeholders, and what we usually work with is interviews, kind of more direct. There are interviews, questionnaires, um, background analysis, for example, reading news also. But even more, there could be even more and more even deeper stakeholder engagement, which then entails kind of partnerships with your stakeholders. Let's say, usually in like governments use these roundtables where they have different stakeholders from different groups. So this could be also in the company level. And then, for example, in Germany, they have trade union representatives in the board. So this is one way also, but not something that we work as much with. And what the benefits are then of stakeholder engagement done in which way possible. So first, if we look at the bottom part of the pyramid, we have the license to operate, so that we can exist as a company. And so there's the legislative license to operate, but also kind of the social license to operate, that people think that you are a worthy part of society. Then we have the image. If you want to have a positive image and kind of improve your sales also, people need to have a good image of your operations, and stakeholder engagement can help in this too. And lastly, we have the competitive edge, which we work a lot with. So we try to use stakeholder engagement to come up with a competitive edge for the company. And this then creates the best solutions for the company and also the best solutions for the stakeholders. So when communicating with your stakeholders, staying on board what is relevant, what is timely now for your stakeholders, and then kind of focusing on that. So for example, if your stakeholders consider that local community involvement is especially important for your business and it helps your activities also, then this is definitely the way you should go to, because it's the way also for sustainable business operations. So this is shortly what we work with related to stakeholder engagement, and so it's a great way also to find competitive edge for companies and better solutions for all stakeholders. So these are just some of the points raised by our work, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Jonas. And moving on to another stakeholder engagement, we have Giulia Carbone, who is with us today from the IUCN. She's the Deputy Director of IUCN Global Business and Biodiversity Program. And she will talk more with us about how an organization such as the IUCN is working with businesses, engaging with them and trying to help them making more sustainable business and having better activities in relation with nature. So Giulia, you have the floor for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Giulia, for the opportunity and for inviting me. And so I would like to use my 4 minutes to share a bit. You know, I have been with IUCN exactly 15 years. I celebrated 15 years like 3 days ago. So I was just reflecting on what I have learned and things that there are a lot of things that I would do differently if I had the chance to go back. And so there are a few things that, that also reflect how we do things in IUCN, but certainly how I do things now, that I have a little bit more, some of the lessons learned. One was actually the point that Jonas has mentioned, is engagement is a must. So I was just reflecting on your organization, the Youth for Nature, and your role. It's so important to engage. It's part of the ecosystem of key social players. It is important that there are organizations out there, civil society organizations that engage business, because business they need to be challenged. And having, and I'll give you a little bit my reflection on what is that challenge. But the first thing is engage. And therefore, this is a call for all conservation organizations out there to learn, to practice and engage and start having that conversation with business. A key learning is that, however, voluntary initiatives, voluntary actions will never be sufficient to get to the change we need. And not just the change we want, the change we need. And this is in climate change and in nature. And I think what has happened in the past year with the global pandemic has given us a good also lessons about how much we need the government to set the rules so that everybody should play by the same rules. Because if we let it only to the individuals, we will never get there. And the same is for global commons, such as, nature, climate change. You need the government to set the rules. You're going to have leaders, and there are plenty of great leaders, but at a certain point, you need to have that kind of, framework that enables everybody, that pushes everybody to the same level, because the leaders alone will not be able to change the ways that we need. And we are talking about climate and nature. The second point is this conversation about pre-competitive space. Competition is important. It's part of a healthy economy, but there is also a very important conversation about the pre-competitive space that you can create when you engage with business to make sure that companies can work together. There is a lot that the companies can benefit from this pre-competitive space, peer-to-peer pressure, peer learning, share tools, and a lot of the projects in IUCN that we work on are on this pre-competitive space, where companies come together and agree that, by doing things together, actually they get a better value rather than trying to go on their own way. And we had Aluminium Stewardship Initiative, the Cerrado das Aguas Consortium. All these are about companies coming together, and it is a really phenomenal approach to get companies to change. Second, another point is that about when you talk to companies and negotiate based on values and not on positions. And that has been a very hard lesson for me. Often we come there, it's like, we know we are right. It's not, is just really not. We might be, what is right and what is wrong, first of all, is really about different values and seeing things in a different way. And that means listening a lot, also from listening to the business as well. They have their ways and they have their needs, they have their challenges. And often, more often than not, by listening, you end up finding out that you actually share the same values. You just need to negotiate a better solution where everybody gets, the solutions they need. I'm looking at my list. I made the list today. Another important point, and this is where certainly IUCN comes, the IUCN comes handy to have the commissions, for example, is try to use as much as possible science to justify what your position, your values, your solutions. And it's true that in some situations there is, not enough knowledge. So, precautionary principle is very important, but even to justify the precautionary principle, use science. And you would be surprised, businesses actually, like to listen to the science. It is important to justify why we're putting, an idea forward rather than something else. And the other important element is think about unintended consequences. And these are often linked to the socioeconomic, context where things are happening. In business, often the impacts that a business has are not just their direct impacts, but what we call indirect impacts, and can be incredibly distant in a way from what the company is doing, but because they're linked to some other elements. And this is where important when you do assessment is keep your mind open and looking at what are unintended consequences. I mean, for example, we are just doing some work on renewable energy and biodiversity, and we know renewable energy is a solution to climate change, and we want more renewable energy. But we are also looking at what could be the unintended consequence of renewable energy on biodiversity. So that's to say, we have to be open-minded to look at this. And last but not least, be obviously optimistic, be idealistic, but also stay a little bit cynical when you talk to business, and keep that kind of critical mind always switched on. That's really, really important. So I hope I have summarized some of my lessons, and I'll stay on for the Q&A. Thank you, Giulia, and thank you, Emma.
Thank you very much, Giulia. That's really, really interesting. All your points were really great. So now I will pass the floor to Vania. So Vania, you're the science part of the business private sector engagement, and you're a biologist and agroecologist, and working on the public-private sector partnership as well. And I wanted to ask you, so from your scientific perspective, what is the impact of the private sector on the environment, and how to help businesses address their issues with the scientists, and from your point of view? You have the floor, Vania.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, indeed. I work in a public-private partnership between GISN and BASF. So if you don't know what BASF is a chemistry company, and one of the things they do is agrochemicals. So you can understand this can be conflicting at times, especially for someone who did a master on agroecology. But it's really interesting to see the potential that there is in engaging the private sector. From what I've seen in this project, the aim of the project that I'm working in is to improve agricultural practices for the conservation of pollinators and the monarch butterfly. So the monarch butterfly is our umbrella species, and through trying to conserve the monarch butterfly, we also help other pollinators through good agricultural practices. So what I see that it's a big potential of having BASF together with us in the project is the scale. BASF is a huge company, and they have reached to thousands and thousands of farmers. So also a bit of context for those who are not so familiar with how the agrochemical issue in Mexico. Most farmers receive their advice either from friends or from the people who are selling them the agrochemicals in the tiny stores. So not the companies, but the tiny stores that sell all the products and the brands. And this isn't necessarily good because they tend to apply them in a way that is not recommended, even by the agrochemical companies. So when I mean that the scale is huge, is that all these farmers who are already using agrochemicals and are using them the wrong way, we can build capacity so that they use the agrochemicals the way they are recommended to be used. Because as you might know, there's a lot of research that goes into producing these agrochemicals and to make sure that the right dosage is applied. So this is one thing that we're working on with farmers, and without BASF, it would be impossible to have the reach that we have. And also because it's different when a company approaches a farmer than when an NGO or someone who is completely nature focused approaches a farmer. The interest is different from the farmers. So this is also one thing that has helped a lot. Another one is the resources. So the private sector has a lot of resources. And of course, this project has a specific allocated budget, but from what we've seen is that BASF is willing to give more, especially for communications. But still, like it helps to communicate that pollinators are important. On the other hand, looking at the maybe things that are a bit conflicting is, well, GIZ is very clear on how it does its engagement with the private sector. So GIZ will not engage with the private sector if it's just a PR stunt, or if it's just for a corporate sustainability, corporate CSR. Sorry, I forgot it right now what it means, the acronym. But if it's just for like a one-time thing and a one-time event, GIZ will not get together with the private sector, because what GIZ is looking for in the private sector to do projects together is that sustainability is part of their business case. So that they really want to incorporate it in everything they do and not just have one big event and showcase it on the media. No, we only work with them if they want to change from within. So this has been my experience with the public-private partnership. Also, we have to be very careful. Whenever we do communications and with all the engagement we do with farmers, we cannot highlight BASF as a company. So we can never be like, oh, BASF products, blah, blah, blah. This is one of our key instructions that we cannot do, because public-private partnerships have to be for the common good. They are not made to benefit one company. So this is tricky, but if you are very clear on it, then you just have to keep pushing it forward. And yeah, so basically this is the experience that I can share with you regarding private sector engagement. And yeah, happy to join the Q&A session.
Thank you very much. Really interesting, as always, all of you. So yeah, I understand that communication is really key in that, and everybody must speak all together and start to find great solutions for the future. So now I will pass the hand to Eliane. So Eliane, you're working with indigenous communities. So it's really interesting to hear you about how to incorporate justice in the private sector solutions regarding nature, and how you are working on that specific issue. You have the floor, Eliane.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here with you today. Just to clarify, I don't work with indigenous communities. I work with communities that are settled in rural parts of Peru. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I've been doing and try to answer that question. To begin with, as you can see, maybe I'm in Peru, I'm in the jungle. This is where I have a life project, and we work with regeneration in all of its dimensions. We are living in nature as nature, understanding what ecological means in this context, and understanding our roles as humans, showing up as active participants of the ecosystem that we inhabit. So conservation and regeneration projects are holistic by nature. So our work takes an ecosystem-based approach, as was mentioned in the beginning of this session. And what we've embarked on is a comprehensive and extends from soil building and growing food to educational programs. So educational programs with the local population of the valley, which is a population that is experiencing a combination of the rural poverty cycle and the influences of mainstream development. And we also work with foreign students where we address the dominant worldview of separation between human and nature. I'm also the country manager of Mzingo U for the past 4 years, where I design learning experiences and hold these transformational experiences for university students worldwide. And we prepare them to be responsible leaders. So we support them acquiring skills hands-on by working and supporting social enterprises locally. And this is where we bridge partnerships between universities and the private sector. I also do consulting work with purpose-driven organizations, mainly around regenerative culture and community building. And I started my professional career in the United States in private banking and then in renewable energy. So as you can see, I've had a very diverse set of experiences from the corporate world to now living in the jungle. And I consider myself an ecological design thinker and a steward of group processes. And what this means is that I design processes that ensure that everyone's voice is being heard, including the voice of nature. And I think this is something very important to consider in the private sector and ask ourselves, how is the voice of nature being included in the conversation? And not only the voice of nature, but the voice of these communities, whether indigenous, whether rural settlements, or any community for that matter, how is that voice being included in the conversation? And is that voice being given a space? And is it being heard? So this is a bit of what my work is about. I don't consider myself an expert. I'm simply speaking from experience. And this experience is paired with a practice of reflexivity and systemic thinking, which I believe is a necessary skill in today's world to take responsibility for our actions. So I want to talk about maybe 3 brief points on what I've learned in terms of involvement and engagement. So it's interesting that engagement has already come up from the other speakers. And I guess one thing to highlight is that the first thing that we need to recognize is that we are nature. Humans are nature. We are part of the systems and ecosystems that we inhabit. We nourish from these systems that we are embedded in, and we also nourish them. Whether that nourishment or that impact is healthy, regenerative, sustained, that's a different story, but we are in an inevitable reciprocal relationship, all of us living beings on this planet. So we are bringing nature wherever we go simply by being human. So it's very important to consider how we are showing up, right? And in order to understand how we need to show up, the first thing that we need to do is listen, as Giulia mentioned. So context and dialogue, this is my first point. If anybody here is familiar with design thinking or design processes or social innovation, you know that the first thing we always need to do if we want to resolve an issue, if we want to create a solution to a problem, if we want to help some sort of or support a community, is understand the context and empathize, right? And then from that place, have a dialogue. So it's the same thing with the private sector. It's interesting sometimes in conservation activism, there's a lot of really playing into this narrative of us versus them that fuels polarization and stops us from engaging. So it's important to be aware of this narrative and observe that and not let that stop us from engaging and really listening. You know, we shouldn't have double standards with our empathy, whether we're working with a native community or we're working with the private sector, it's important to listen to each other and foster dialogue. And again, make sure that all the voices that are relevant have a space to be expressed and that they are heard. So listening, context, and dialogue is key for engagement and involvement. The second point I want to bring up is organizations are the people that are part of them. So who the collaborators are is who the organization is. So we must be very, very aware, and this is something that we really invite out of the students that we work with, is that it all starts with oneself. So it's in the way we do things, not only in what we do. So I love this Satish Kumar, which is a huge inspiration to me. He says, if you want a friend, be a friend. If you want a lover, be a lover. So on this thread, what I say is that if you want nature to thrive, then be thriving nature and bring that into the private sector or into whatever it is that you're doing. Embody nature. So it's very important, especially now, that the youth participate and bring the voice of their generation into the private sector, because this breeds culture and this brings relevance into what the private sector is doing, right? If youth doesn't bring their voice in, then what the private sector is doing in a way becomes irrelevant to the needs of future generations. So most importantly is to bring more coherence also into the places and spaces that we are inhabiting. So cultivating presence and self-awareness, again, observing and listening. To understand how we show up and how we can engage and participate. And the final point I'll bring up, which was mentioned also about scale. So I'll bring up another perspective. So we hear everywhere that we need to scale. We are asked about the scalability of our initiatives, but we are rarely asked about the depth of our interventions. We do not seem to value relationship to place, for example. You know, being in relationship to a place, to people, to the human and non-human inhabitants of that place is crucial to understand the context. It's crucial to understand what we're actually working with. The same way that every individual is unique, every place is unique. So in order to serve a place or nature, we must know what is appropriate. And to understand what is appropriate, we need to know the place itself. So scalability of depth is what I'm talking about, is important. Sustained connection, deepening of understanding, being in relationship. Depth of impact speaks to a certain pace, right? A time scale that allows us to know and to be known. So I just want to leave you with this message that we must be humble and acknowledge that in our own lifetime, we won't see all the changes that we are working towards, and that's okay. And we need to recognize the pace of nature and bring that also into our engagements, into our solutions, and into the ways that we operate also, so there's no burnout. So I want to leave you with the message that it's important to redefine what success means if we want to include Earth and people when we speak of thriving economies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eliane, for all these points you made out. So yeah, it's really key to put people, to consider people as part of the ecosystem and nature being one of the stakeholders in here around. And finally, I will invite our last speakers, Alice. So Alice, you're a technician and environmental engineer, and you're calling from Brazil. So here, I want to ask you, what do you think are the pathways that is used by the private sector to get to a sustainable future, and how we can design for a sustainable future using the private sector engagement?
Perfect. Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to be at this event with people with incredible experience and the best, talking about the power of young people and building a more sustainable world. My name is Alice Monteiro, and I'm from Brazil. I have been dedicated to study the environment for 10 years, and I am an environmental technician and an environmental engineer. At the age of 16, I made a decision. I'm going to change the world. and since then, I have dedicated myself of this mission. I had the opportunity to coordinate some projects in the private sector with the implementation of environment technologies, reducing the impact on natural. Solutions such as the installation of a biodigester can favor to use the waste and generate energy, for example. I also work in the solar farm sector, a strong trend in Brazilian market. In addition to power generation, many companies here today are using this technology as a way to make the operation carbon neutral or to reduce its impact in relation to climate change. I currently work for a company which uses the sustainable development goals in a strategic way to generate value for its customers. I work mainly in the technical and financial modeling of sustainable urban structures. Brazil has increasingly expanded public-private partnership in an attempt to offer the population a higher quality infrastructure. I participate in the modeling of the first public concession in Brazil with guidelines aligned with sustainability. The private sector would have a premise the harmonization with nature, being that we propose natural, for example, swimming pools to capture rainwater, photovoltaic panels, and the composition of the parking lot, use of natural light to reduce energy consumption, and recycle all the waste generated. This was just one example of how the private sector can contribute to build more resilient and sustainable urban infrastructure. I end my speech here. Thank you for your attention, and any question I'm available.
Thank you very much, Alice. Really impressive curriculum here as well. So jumping out, we are getting to the Q&A section. I guess many people have a lot of questions. This session is up. So we've heard a lot of different stakeholders from the private sector, from public organizations, international organizations, and so on. And understanding all of that, I want to ask the first question to everyone and to try to ask all of you, the 5 speakers, how to make businesses recognize that there is no business in a dead planet, because we know that some businesses and companies are really engaging a lot, but some companies are not. And they are sometimes really hard to reach out to make them understand how it is good for the economy and for nature and for everyone's well-being that we have to do actions and we have to do something. And Giulia mentioned it earlier that we have to listen to everyone, but really curious to know how you see in the future how we will get to engage with all these businesses that are not already engaged and sometimes even being climate skeptical. So I can give the floor to maybe Giulia. You've been maybe engaging more with this kind of businesses.
Yeah, so that's certainly the challenge, because I think most of us, well, at least from IUCN perspective, we somehow have an easy life. We end up engaging with companies that seem to have already kind of understood the need to engage, and which doesn't mean that we engage with everybody, because I just wanted to make sure that we do also. And I think that's a tool that I would encourage anybody who wants to engage with business to, equip yourself with clear guidelines on what kind of sectors and what kind of companies to engage, so that you have a very clear framework. So we do have that, which doesn't mean therefore that with every company, we engage with every company that comes to IUCN. But generally, the companies we run into are companies that have already kind of had that kind of internal moment and kind of like saying, yes, we do have to change the ways we operate, or we have an issue, or because they had some pressures from maybe local NGOs and they need to understand better the science. And in a way, therefore, this is relatively easy then. The challenge is to go to those who just haven't seen it yet and that pretend that the problem is not there. And this is where I was saying, I think we can't imagine this change to happen only for the full force of our conviction in our science. We also need policy and strong regulations, because there are going to be some companies that they will just not want to see it. And you do need to have that kind of push. So the leaders help to demonstrate that things can be done differently. That's our theory of change. We need to work with certain leaders, even, they are not, but we want to change, entire sectors, but the leaders show the way, they pave the way. But then you need the other forces. You need pressure from policymakers, you need the pressure from consumers, you need the pressure from clients throughout the supply chain to make it happen. Because some companies will just not have that kind of moment of of understanding that they need to also take action. So that's my view on this.
Thank you very much. So anyone wants to step in talking about how to engage more? Maybe Giulia, you have some experience with that as well, or do you want more to talk about? I see that there is a question about how to engage more with individuals, because sometimes individuals want to go with the private sector, help the private sector, and so on. So how to make that happen? This is a question from the audience we have today.
Maybe I'll answer the first question first. So I would also like to add to that point, and possibly my point of view is a kind of geographically specific, but we've also found that sustainability in many terms is something of a competitive advantage as well. And our clients are also seeing that moving towards this direction is not only better for the planet, but also good for the company as well. So I wanted to bring this point also. What was the second question related to?
The second question is more about how to help individuals to engage with the private sector when individual wants to make private sector change the practice, or just sharing with them their worries. For instance, local communities that is having trouble with the supplier of a company, for instance, how to help them engaging in that way.
Yeah, I can understand that definitely is something that is difficult, especially when considering larger companies, which are, if you have looked at like big corporative websites, it can be quite difficult to find a point where to leave your comment. And then, of course, you can have places you can contact through social media, for example, but also through your politicians that you elect. Write about it, share. I don't know if anyone else comes up with other points, but we, like from my experience and what we work most with is that, as was mentioned before, that we work with companies who want to get in touch with their stakeholders, and I believe this is the best way to do it, or this is the best way to work on that. But I don't know if someone else has something else to add on this.
Thank you very much, Giulia. Anyone else has more insight to add on that, for instance, or we can move to another question?
I could add to the first question.
Go ahead.
So one reason why the private sector would want to engage more is, well, I'm going to talk about the example of BASF. Their clients are farmers, and BASF recognizes, and because the science says so, that the biggest reason why we're losing pollinators is because of the bad use of agrochemicals. So they recognize this, and they understand that for their clients, it's important that their product is used correctly. So that's one reason why they are engaged. In Mexico, 85% of crops need to be animal pollinated, so it's a lot. And the other reason is because as an agrochemical company, they are publicly afraid that they will be banned altogether. So it was mentioned before. that NGOs and civil society often puts pressure on business. Well, I can tell you firsthand that it does have an effect. Like, one reason why they are engaging so much in this is because they are afraid they will be banned altogether, that civil society is not accepting them anymore. So this is a call, like, it's super good to be engaged with the private sector, but as civil society, it's also super good to continue to put this pressure, no? Based on science and based on like science arguments, but it's important both sides.
Thank you very much. So anyone else has any more insights to add to this great discussion? Any question to ask other
Giulia,
speakers?
Could
Yes, go
I
ahead,
give an
Alice.
example?
Yes, please.
So, for example, in a public-private partnership, we are able to measure the social, environmental, and economic impact. We calculate, for example, the social return of private investment. So, for every one invest, for example, by the private sector, there is a return approximately 7 for society, with all the value chain generated with this kind of investment. So it is a good example to show how the private sector could generate value for the social part, environmental or economic for a city, for example. So is that.
Thank you very much. So I think we're really great. So maybe Eliane, you have anything to add or anyone? And if not, we can wrap up this really, really interesting roundtable. Thank you very much, everyone. Please keep here because we ask you at the end what are your takeaways and what you're planning for the future in relation with the private sector and nature. And I think now we can take a really nice break, a 5 minutes. Please go ahead, take a break, go to the bathroom, take a nice cup of water, and join us in 5 minutes.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We'll get started with the second round table in just a minute. It was a really great discussion that we had with our speakers on private sector and nature engagement. Thank you to all of our speakers for their amazing insights. It's been a really inspiring discussion. And thank you to everybody who has contributed with questions in the Slido. Hopefully we'll have time at the end to address some more of these questions. For this second session, which I'll be starting in just a few seconds, we're going to start off again with another word cloud for the audience, and then we'll be moving into our brief presentations from each of our speakers, and again, jump into another Q&A time that is specific to youth engagement in the private sector. So here's a slide that shows each of our speakers. We again have 5 speakers from very diverse backgrounds, from the private sector, from engagement in NGOs, trying to push the private sector on more youth engagement, people who are working in different organizations. So I think it's going to be a really great discussion once again. First, we have another Slido poll, another word cloud. And this question is, what word comes into your mind when thinking about the private sector and youth engagement? So you can go ahead and add your thoughts to the Slido. Thank you to Giulia for adding the link to the Slido back in. You can see we have a lot of words coming in. Change, collaboration. Wow. Advocacy, surface level, resilience, important, non-existent, and tokenistic, and distant. Those are some interesting, more negative words that we can dive into as well. Innovation, responsibility, important. Yeah, thank you everybody for adding your thoughts to the Slido. I think we're gonna have a really great discussion. Our first speaker today in this roundtable is Khyati. She works with Defend Our Future and youth engagement based out of the United States. So I will bring the floor over to her. The question that we want you to focus on, Khyati, is what is the importance of bringing youth to the table to discuss private sector engagement, especially in discussions around national policy?
Thanks, Emma. Thank you for having me here. I am Khyati Rathore. I use pronouns she, her. I am from India, currently based in New York. And like Emma mentioned, I'm working with Defend Our Future. Just quickly, I want to say that it's interesting to see the poll results. You know, folks mentioned disconnected, distant, you know, that kind of words appeared. And then partnership, collaboration, and innovation. I think my story kind of aligns very much with those sentiments. I did initially start my career as an architect and planner, and I saw those disconnects in the way we work within the private sector, right? And my love for exploring sustainability practices and climate strategies, and the urge to understand the broader impacts of my work and bridge those disconnects kind of got me here, and I am a full-time climate advocate now. So I'm currently working with the Defend Our Future team at Environmental Defense Fund. And in our team, we work with young people from across the spectrum, across political spectrum, to lead climate advocacy and influence our decision makers to advance climate progress. So we work with students across the US who are engaged in advocacy within their campuses, their networks and their communities. Also work with the young professionals and students to drive climate ambition through their current and future employers. You know, this really came up in the previous discussion that employees can be an important lever in pushing the private sector in the right direction, right? So we try to work with young people, train them, equip them, empower them to become effective advocates, whether it's through conducting meetings with their elected officials, voicing their concerns to various mediums, using their civic rights, or influencing corporate behavior by asking the right questions and demanding accountability from their leaders. And in doing so, we work with folks from across political spectrum to get all perspectives on the table and advance long-term solutions. I think that's one of the strengths of this global youth movement that I see is it really ensures inclusivity and brings diversity of voices to the table, to the discussion. And sort of what we're trying to do with our discussion today as well. It's really fantastic to see that. So kind of diving a little bit deeper into the work that I am specifically focusing on is to engage with young professionals and students to yield their influence to drive private sector ambitions on climate action. And we all have kind of discussed it, and we know that the private sector has a crucial role to play in this fight against climate change. Along with the bigger policy frameworks, the regulations that are required, our business leaders must also commit to the net zero targets. And at this point, that is not enough. We need solid plans. Our businesses, private sectors need to allocate resources and implement those plans. And the one thing that sometimes is kind of missing out of the discussion, and we try to kind of point that through you to make the voice heard, is that businesses have a lot of political influence, which they need to use to drive climate progress, advocate for climate policies that in turn will help them achieve their own targets towards this transition to 100% clean economy. And the theory of change for the Youth Engagement Initiative is this: if business leaders believe that acting on climate change is required to compete for talent in this hyper-competitive market and to manage their reputational and business risk, then they'll act. And strong business leadership will help bring about the policy change and the systemic change that is really required at this point. I'll kind of, there's a lot to talk about here, and I'm happy to dig a bit deeper into the why and how of it through our discussion. But the one sort of positive note I'll leave you here with is that, this is a new area of activism, the employee lever, and there's much to be done to empower youth to provide them with the right support system and resources. But it is a challenge, but I think this pandemic has shown us how resilient and adaptable we all are. Climate advocates like us have found ways to connect virtually, like we're doing today. And the entire world economy kind of found ways to function in a new system. The governments around the world found ways to operate their systems in new ways. So we changed for one crisis, and I'm sure we can surely do that for climate change, which is the one big existential crisis in front of us today. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, especially coming from the United States, where we're just coming off of a Trump presidency and a Trump administration. It's really great to hear that youth, even if they don't have voting power, can really have that political power and can influence the private sector to help push for policy. So thank you so much for all of your insights. Looking forward to the Q&A. Our next speaker is Sarah. So really excited to hear from Sarah. She has a great background working as an energy engineer, but also working on youth engagement for the IUCN and also as a global shaper at the WEF. So Sarah, as you introduce yourself, we would also like you to keep in mind the question, how can young people become more involved in the private sector, and what opportunities and barriers exist to youth engagement in the private sector?
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'm really pleased to be with you today. So a little bit about me. I studied electrical and computer engineering in my bachelor's, and I did my master's in renewable energy engineering. And it came from my belief that any change to our current status of this crisis should come from change in the energy sector and in the way that we operate our plants and in the way that we electrify the world. So I joined the private sector as a business development manager, working on developing renewable energy assets, working on developing sustainable utilities within my country. Furthermore, I'm an activist working with multiple organizations on the climate change issue. Recently, I have worked with a bunch of youth on publishing 2 papers showing youth engagement in the sector, in the climate change and the energy, and giving our views. Sadly, in the MENA region, in the region where I am, and there is no much of an engagement. There is no much of the question of what youth think our systems should look like, and what our youth think the solution is for climate change in terms of adaptation and mitigation. So the only way that we could have got our voices out is through writing a policy recommendation paper to the policymakers. And this is just to show you how much limited in so many parts of the world youth participation is. So when we ask the question, how can young people become more involved? We have to examine first the political systems where these young people are operating under. And we have to become innovative in the way that we try to engage them with the private sector. So with no doubt, the private sector has assumed a tremendous power to influence society and political systems. Private businesses is a key source for economic growth. And when we try to dissect where the youth are positioned within that system, I can say that in two levels or in 2 ways. Either youth affect change by either being employed within the private sector or being themselves entrepreneurs, or they're affected by these private businesses and their practices, either as consumers or as part of the civil society. And if we try to look at the first level of youth as employees and as entrepreneurs, we see that internationally, youth unemployment is at record highs, especially after the COVID-19 crisis that we have all witnessed. And there is no much support for social entrepreneurs and environmental entrepreneurs from the private sector. There is no funding, there is no support whatsoever. From the second level, which is as consumers and civil society members, companies view that the only way to engage youth is through their CSR activities, through corporate social responsibility, as if it's something not primary, as if it's something secondary. Let's involve youth, let's do a program to train youth or to empower youth. And its reality is not listening to youth, it's just silencing others by saying that we already have done our part to engage youth and we have done a corporate social responsibility activity or a program for youth. So there is no much of an initiatives that in its essence tries to support youth, engage youth, listen to youth as consumers and as civil society members, and give them the possibility and the ability to advocate to what they think the businesses practices should be and should look like. On top of my mind, we need to encourage constructive youth participation in these 2 levels, and we allow private sector or before enforce that private sector should take responsibility to empower youth and to engage youth on all levels. Empower youth within their organizations to speak out, to make decisions that are value-driven, that is compliant with what youth think in their societies, in their communities, is the right way that their businesses should conduct their practices. And we should as well enable young people to have sustainable income, to be employed within the private sector, and have this self-worth and internal resilience, and be independent and be able to operate within the private sector, and be independent and be able to drive change within. So I'm looking forward the discussion today and looking forward for the Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's really great to get your perspective. And I like what you said about how there are two ways that youth can get involved. Either they're working on businesses or working in businesses, or they are impacted by the private sector and have an opportunity to push forward from the outside. So I think that leads nicely into our next speaker, Loic, who is working in both sides. He's both an ESG consultant, and I would ask you to explain to us what ESG is and what it really means. And then he's also the Director of Partnerships at Leading Change. So really excited to hear what you have to say, Loic.
Yes, so thank you for having me, and really excited to be part of this wonderful panel. So yes, just maybe some background as to how I ended up in ESG consulting, and I will explain what ESG means. I had experiences, I've worked sort of now the last 3 years in the private sector, both with corporates, so businesses, and the investment side, the finance side. Previous to this, I was at Desjardins Insurance. So understanding sort of there, what was interesting is understanding the implications of climate change, biodiversity loss, and other sort of environmental catastrophes on the insurance industry, because that will be costly for that industry. And at the end of the day, insurance was not sort of where I wanted to be, but I think a tremendous sector that has a lot of potential to effectuate change and conduct actually a lot of climate research, as it's a sector that will be so affected by these things. And then that actually brought me and transitioned me to EY, where I worked in the climate change and sustainability services team as a consultant there. And really there we help companies understand the risk and opportunities. And I think that the second one is also important. There are opportunities arising from sort of climate change and other sustainability issues, which can include also health and safety, diversity, Indigenous relations. And speaking here in Canada, Indigenous relations is very important here in Canada, both from businesses and investors' perspectives. And eventually, I realized that finance would have, and finance has such a big role in this transition towards a lower carbon economy, towards mitigating biodiversity loss. And so that brought me to Milani, where I am today, and where I work as an ESG consultant. So what is ESG? So ESG really just stands for environmental, social, and governance. And so a couple examples of sort of the E that we would consider: there's climate change, there's obviously biodiversity loss, there's waste, there's water, all these things that are becoming rising issues. And if I may say so, there's this it's funnily sort of despairing sort of a cartoon that shows different waves. And so it starts with the smallest wave of COVID-19, a bigger wave of recession, which is going to be following COVID-19. Then after that, climate change. And then the biggest wave is actually biodiversity loss. And so there's a lot of work ahead of us, definitely, as we have these conversations. And the finance sector, while for all of its maybe shortcomings, is really starting to get familiar with these issues and really researching sort of what the next steps are and how they can address these issues. Because again, they will be very severely affected by them. And so at Milani, essentially what we do is we help both investors sort of integrate material ESG issues into their investment strategies and decision-making processes. And then we also help companies on their end improve ESG disclosure and planning. Because investors, at the end of the day, in order to make their investment decisions as to whether or not to invest in a company, need to understand not only these days the financial sort of aspects and the financial performance of a company, but also understand their ESG performance. And so what are they doing in terms of addressing environmental issues, the social issues at the governance stage? Sort of what does the company look like? So do they integrate diversity, both gender, ethnicity, BIPOC representation at their board, within their executive management, within their employees? If they don't, that actually does represent a risk in many regards. And so it's all of these factors that really in this sort of sphere of responsible investing all the way to even impact investing. And there is a spectrum here, and I won't go into the details there, but really exploring the importance of integrating these issues into any investment decisions. And at the end of the day, having investors in many regards being advocates for sustainability and climate change, and asking companies if they're doing enough, and having companies improve their disclosure for investors to look at, and for actually the public as well to be more aware. There is this need for increased transparency as to what is really happening in this private sector by businesses. And so in a nutshell, I would say that's what we do. Yes, I'm very interested to hear what the Q&As will be about. I will say that in terms of youth and youth engagement related to finance, and related to the private sector, private sectors will often have stakeholder engagement where they ask all of their stakeholders and the communities in which they operate in sort of what the important ESG issues are that they should be addressing for the next couple of years. And it is my sort of opinion, definitely, that youth should definitely be engaged in those discussions as they assess which are the most important ESG issues. Youth should have a seat at that table to voice their opinions and their concerns, because at the end of the day, I think that the younger generation is the one that is most interested by things like responsible investing and by ESG opportunities and efforts. So with that, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. And like you said, I think youth are the individuals, young people are really thinking about the future and thinking ahead. So I think it's great if we can all think about how to influence investors and shareholders to help make their companies more sustainable. I think that's a really great tool that young people can have to continue pushing forward. And I think that moves well into our next speaker. Antoine is somebody who is actually working on a green business. So it'd be interesting to hear from you. What's it like to start a business as a young professional? Do you feel like there are any challenges specific to the fact that you are a younger business person?
Hey, hello everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really proud to be here with you today, guys. So the reason why I wanted to be an entrepreneur in the business industry first is just because I want to be proud of my work. When I wake up every morning, I really need that. I feel like I need to be useful for the new generations, for the planet, for people around me. Also, I think there is a huge opportunity nowadays to create new jobs, to find new jobs that suits with our values, with what we want to defend in our everyday life, and to earn money in the same time. I think we have this huge opportunity now. So I want to seize that opportunity, to be honest. Also, I want to put in practice my skills and my values in order to be an actor of the essential changements we need to bring for the implementation of a sustainable development. Also with my partners, so with my associates, my brother and my friend from uni, we are creating Les Tontons Flowers company in Paris. So we want to start first to promote and to develop the urban agriculture in Paris, a system that respects plants and consumers. That is very important to us. So we want to offer a healthy and sustainable food that will feed people with organic products, and as I said, that will respect consumers and plants. Also, what is very important for us is this pedagogical incentive program, because we really want to show people how it works, this innovative system hydroponic. We want to receive people to show them how it works, to explain every single part of the process. That is very important for us, these sensibilization workshops. Also the made in local products. We want to bring the production as close as possible to the people, to the consumers, instead of buy products that comes from all around the world that travel too much. It loses flavor, it doesn't make sense for us. So we really want to bring these local products in the city. So that's the big points of our project with Les Tontons Flowers. We are creating the company. It's not done yet. For the second question, my relation with nature, I think it comes from my education. I come from a very little village in the south of France, and I grew up with these values that respect nature, that respect people. So yeah, I really think it comes from my education. And what helped us to reach these goals, it's really positive. Actually, it's the city of Paris, the council, that we were looking for a place to put our container in the city of Paris, which is very hard. Like, you need to find even a small room in Paris, you have to struggle. And we knocked some doors, and the city of Paris, they received us in the office as kings, really. They told us, guys, your project is amazing. We will find something for you. And within 1 month, they found a spot to put our 30-meter square, 6-ton big baby on the Petite Ceinture in Paris. So that was a huge help, and they are still behind us. They help a lot. Also, I would say the university, because I was 3 years ago looking for a master in the sustainable development area, a public one, so for free. And I found this in Paris, and thanks to this, I've learned a lot. I've met a lot of nice people, and that's how I'm here today with this project. Is thanks to these institutions, the city of Paris and the university. So I'm really thankful for that. So yeah, that's the positive point. And also, of course, the determination that is very important. Without determination, we do nothing, and we are determined for the planet. So yeah, that will be my last word. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's so inspiring to hear about all the work you've done, and congratulations on getting this far. It sounds like you're doing really great work.
Thank you
so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
Our next speaker is Ala, who's also a young entrepreneur. So it'll be really great to hear his perspective as well on what it's like to start a business as a young person. And then we also wanted to ask you, what do companies and regional or global leaders expect from young people as decision makers regarding the nature and climate crises? So Ala, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ima, and for the organizers of this event to give me the opportunity to speak at this roundtable. So, hi everyone, my name is Ala, and I'm from Yemen. I'm working as a global ambassador for the West Asia region with Youth for Nature, and I'm leading the Arab Youth Sustainable Development Network. I'm the co-founder of Color Me company, which was initiated by a group of university students to compete on a regional competition for young entrepreneurs. And the idea of the startup won the prize of the best social impact of in the year 2020. The main reason behind the establishment of Color Me was to introduce nature-based solutions to the fast fashion industry to make it more sustainable by using natural fibers, plant-based dyes, and textiles. This global industry touches us all and employs millions of people around the globe, but it's a very dirty business that has long hidden how it works. The fashion industry is responsible for 10% of the global carbon footprint, negative environmental effects, including water pollution, the use of toxic chemicals, and high levels of waste of textile waste, and also poor working conditions for millions of workers, primarily women. So through Color Me, we are calling the private sector and all groups of society to change their lifestyles and consumption habits. So actually, I have started with environmental activism a year and a half ago, and the first thing that triggers my attention was to do a study on the pattern of clothes consumption to establish Color Me. But when I introduced the idea to the people, I have received encouragement from them, but nobody was interested in the issue that I am working on because they do not understand the idea that the accumulation of old clothes, which are made from oil products in landfills, can harm the natural ecosystems. So I realized that before I introduce these solutions to my community, it's necessary to educate them and raise their awareness on how our daily habits harm our ecosystems and harm our nature. So that's why I have shifted my career and focused more on educating people about sustainability and their role in promoting sustainable development across their communities and to be agents of change. But young people in the Arab region are not aware of these spaces where they can share their thoughts and demand the change that they hope to see. We have to ensure that there is inclusivity in the negotiations decision with the private sector. There should be strong cooperation between youth and the private sector, both in principle and in practice, in order to highlight the role of youth as social actors and promote the general understanding of the great potential of youth as development partners. So I think it's important to realize that COVID-19 shifts how youth can be engaged with the private sectors over the past years. We saw a really huge number of people from across the world who are talking in meetings or attending conferences. That's make us ensure that young people are presented where decisions are taken, ensuring that young people are pushing the private sector to do more and more each day. So from 5 years, the number of people who are active in these spaces are fewer than today. Youth should be involved in the discussions table with the private sector to discuss the importance of transparency in the fashion industry, for example. So only with access to this kind of information, we will be able to choose more sustainable products that meet our personal values and that will save our ecosystems. Thank you, Ina.
Thank you very much. I really like what you said about education and how some people in your region aren't as aware of the issues. I think that's something that's so important, especially with youth engagement. There's so much going on at all times. It's so important to educate people on what the issues really are, what the science is, what policies exist. So thank you so much. Thank you for your work. We now have about 10 minutes for Q&A with the speakers. And after that, we're going to go into a short presentation and go into more question and answer with speakers from both panels. So thank you to everybody who has already posed some questions in our Slido. You can continue asking questions of all speakers at this point. So let me see if I can find one of the questions. So I think this might be a good question for Loic. What does the private sector need to do to get investment in nature-based solutions from the private sector? And how can youth get involved in that work with investors and ESG stakeholder groups?
So just to confirm, it's how can we have more investments in nature-based solutions?
Yes.
Well, I would say that biodiversity, it has been on the radar for the investment community for a while. The issue we seem to have is there is an acknowledgement and a recognition of the issue. There is more difficulty in actually addressing it because as opposed to climate change, which is a big issue, but as opposed to focusing on emissions, biodiversity starts looking at a lot of other factors. And so there's almost this question of, well, does it become part of our fiduciary duty? Does it become part of what the company should also be addressing, even when maybe operations aren't totally related to those biodiversity loss factors? But I will say that in 2020, for example, there was the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, and this basically aims to provide a network and a framework for corporates and financial institutions to assess, manage, and report on their dependencies and impacts on nature. And so basically, it's to better evaluate nature-related risks and redirect global financial flows from operations that have what we would call nature negative outcomes to nature positive outcomes. And these are aligned with the Paris Agreement, the UN SDGs. There are also a bunch of new sort of, within the last 5 years, I would say, initiatives that have sprung up, Finance for Biodiversity Pledge, Business for Nature, Terra Carta, Act for Nature. All of these are for the most part, they're either private sector led or investor led initiatives to tackle the issue of biodiversity loss. But it is my opinion that we're still at a stage of trying to determine that framework, that structure, how the investment community can address these issues.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for sharing. Our next question goes out to all of the speakers. What would you recommend to young activists who see the private sector as the enemy? Have any of you ever seen the private sector as the enemy? And do you still?
I could go here. It's interesting. At some point, I had that kind of emotion where it's like, oh, private sector is creating all of this chaos, and they're responsible for so much negative impact on the biodiversity and the climate change, broadly speaking. But I definitely very quickly moved away from that, and I do realize that young people are now becoming the biggest section of consumers, voters, employees, and we sort of talked about it. Sarah mentioned it as well. And this new generation has different priorities. We align the work that we are doing with the values that we hold dear to us. And and if the businesses want to be successful and they need to cater to them, to this new audience, to this new set of consumers and customers and professionals. So I think in that sense, I very quickly realized that there's so much more to be done in moving those levers. And in our previous conversation, I think Giulia, she mentioned that that you would realize if you try to negotiate in the right ways that a lot of the bottom line values are kind of common in how we envision the future and in how private sector sees the business sense in taking the direction, steps in the right direction. So I think there's a lot of potential for collaboration. Youth can be really strong allies for private sector in leading the innovation, in implementing the solutions. And as activists, I think we can give the right nudge and push in the right direction as and when required. That's the strength of this global youth movement.
I might jump in just very quickly and 100% agree with that. I will also say, going back to the words of change, collaboration, and opportunity that sort of surfaced in that poll that we did, I 100% agree that we need collaboration to get to change, which will produce opportunities down the line for both youth and the private sector. And I think there is a scare in a lot of actors that are within the private sector of, well, this is what the youth think of us. We're getting shunned in terms of our sustainability performances, in terms of a bunch of areas. Oftentimes, it is my impression that it is not that they refuse to move or they refuse to transition to a lower carbon economy or nature sort of positive outcomes, but it's that they might not know how to, or that they don't know where to even begin. And so it is youth that are engaged in sustainability that are, we're all experts in our own rights and in our own ways to come into that conversation and help them. So conversation rather than frustration almost, if I may say so.
Emma, if I may add to that, I remember Professor Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum once said that we need to move from an economy of production and consumption to an economy of sharing and caring. We fear of what we don't know. We fear what we're ignorant of. Once we are engaged with the private sector, once we are part of the private sector, once we break this intergenerational gap, because it's all about this generational gap between the big guys, the old guys, and I put an emphasis on old men and old guys because it's mostly men who are on top of these companies. Once we try to bridge that gap, we talk, we have that dialogue, we explain to them that we do not want an economy that is not ethical, that is not sustainable, that does not relate to us. So I really believe that the key is the dialogue, and we should drift away from fear and think about how we can have a constructive conversation with the private sector.
Absolutely. I love this theme that's coming out. That's all about discussion, collaboration, making sure that we have cross-generational dialogue and cross-regional dialogue. I think that sessions like these are the very beginning of that. And if we can all take lessons learned from sessions like this back home to our regions and home to different companies and organizations that we work with, I think that we can create some widespread change. And sort of jumping off of that, we had a couple questions that I think Anton and Ala might be able to answer. As a young entrepreneur, what steps can a person take to start their own business, perhaps an ecotourism business? And how can you seek funding in order to go about creating these new green startups? Maybe Anton, you can take the floor and just think about how you started off, what it was like starting off, and how you were able to secure that funding and that support.
Yeah, sure. How we did for the funding, actually, we are doing the funding now. So there are some for example, Paris Initiative Entreprise. That is an organism where you can ask money. It's a 0% rate. And I just had the call with this organism before this. And so yeah, they really like this kind of projects because it goes in the sense of the Council of Paris. They need people like us. It's almost politic because they need people like us to make urban agriculture. It's in the plan for the future for the politics in the city of Paris. So that helps a lot actually to raise some funds. And yeah, like they need young people like us for the future, for the big cities. They don't want to always deal with the big companies. They really trust in us, I think. So yeah, I think that's the most important thing to raise funds.
Thank you for sharing your experience. Ala, I wonder if you've had a similar experience, if it's been different for you.
Okay, so I don't know the person who asked the question in what country he's based, but I will talk about my context. So in my region, we are facing so many challenges to acquire funds from the private sector to start our green businesses, because there is no public interest in these fields. So that's why I wanted to share with you that it depends on the context and in what country you are based on. Thank you.
I'll watch the chat to see if we get any other engagement. Another question we have for all speakers is, are businesses in the private sector aware of youth engagement and aware of climate and biodiversity issues? Or do we have to continue facilitating that dialogue to help them better understand issues and solutions? Let's open to the floor if anybody has any initial thoughts.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I think we're waiting for the speakers to speak right now. So I'm going to mute you, and if you could add your thoughts to the Slido board, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Well, I'll quickly add here. I guess my short answer would be a no for a big section of the private sector. It's interesting to see off late within the last, especially 2 years or so, I've seen so many companies step up and they're committing to 100% zero emission vehicle fleets that's driving the demand on the market. The big automakers are producing and committing to 100% EV production. All of that, there is a momentum here to be leveraged, but I think so the important part to remember is that we want a 100% clean economy, and the 100% can only come if companies across the board are on the board to make this transition, and for which we need to also think about all those companies, all the private sector actors that need to be part of that dialogue to kind of make the point that this is important and why it's important and why it's disrupting their businesses, their supply chains, impacting their consumers, their employees, and such. And I think young people really bring a fresh perspective to the table every time they speak about these issues. The need to disrupt the status quo is important to create this system-wide change. And young people who are on the panel with us today, I see these brilliant young minds, working all around me to bring these solutions to the table, and not just identifying the gaps and issues with their fresh perspective. I think that's required to be integrated both within the private sector, across scale, across spectrum, across regions, and also at the global platforms, the negotiation platforms, and international agreements and such.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's great that we have so many young people working right now across all different platforms. And I also noticed a bit of discussion in the chat, so that's great as well. Feel free to take a look there. But I think unless anybody has any final thoughts, I'll give a moment. But we're going to move on to the next piece of the presentation. Right, so thank you so much to all of our speakers on the second roundtable. We will invite you back in about 5 minutes to continue discussing all of these great topics that we have been throughout the session. I'm going to pass the floor back over to Giulia for just a quick few minutes to continue discussing these issues.
Yeah, thank you. So basically, we wanted to address a little bit greenwashing, because many companies are already doing things that they label as good for nature, good for the environment, reaching net zero, etc. But sometimes we're not really into what we call a good action for the environment. At Choose for Nature, we are looking for the nature-based solution as a great solution to move forward, because it is addressing, as we've been saying, many issues, social issues, economic issues, justice issues as well. It's really important to empower minorities and communities that doesn't have the power on their own environment. And just to go quickly through that, the question is how to make sure that all the issues that are addressed by the private sector are addressed equally, fairly, and within the justice. And how do we as young people make sure that they're not going into greenwashing, because there are so many actions. And some of you have been talking about it a little. So we have the science, we have being aware of all the sector, which is not only being aware of the economy, but also being aware of the social issues, the environmental issues, and this is a way to address them really correctly. And we must ask ourselves, is this action really grounded into justice? And also, we are a generation that is more likely to engage with and work with companies that are genuinely work positively for nature. Many surveys have shown that big companies such as oil and gas companies can't find any more workers and good workers, because young people don't want to work for them anymore. They have a bad reputation. We know they're really bad for the environment, doing lots of greenwashing. So they have also, this is a way to shift their ways of doing, because we're pushing them indirectly about doing really genuine actions. This discussion around nature-based solutions is a discussion we have a lot at Youth for Nature, because internationally it's a big word that is now widely used, and we are talking a little more about it on the April 15th, and all the maybe also the dangers we can find in this notion. It's a very, very broad and important notion that we have to address. So I think we can move on now on what are the takeaways we can find from all this discussion we have. And I maybe give the floor to Emma about that.
Yeah, thank you, Giulia. I think it's really important to keep in mind the different issues around greenwashing and who is co-opting the narrative, as you mentioned. And there's also some discussion going on in the chat about that, and some discussion going on in the Slido. So thank you, everybody, for participating. This is a question that we want to open up to our speakers. What are you looking forward to in the future, in the coming months and years, regarding the private sector, nature, climate, and youth engagement? What are you looking forward to, and what strategies do you see as moving forward with? So I will leave it to the speakers if somebody has some first thoughts. Otherwise, I will call on somebody from the first session to add their thoughts.
I can go.
Yeah, go ahead, Eliane. Go ahead, Eliane.
Thank you. Yeah, I like to say that every choice, I may have a slight delay.
There is. Maybe we'll start with Sarah and then come back to you after she's finished.
I'll just give a small statement that I'm looking to see that the private sector sees youth as a resource and an important element to drive change from within, as an important actor to reinstate the values of environmental conservation and environmental protection, and to empower youth to be in a leadership positions to make these value-driven decision making.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Eliane, you want to see if it looks like you don't have a lag anymore?
Can I add something?
Yeah, let's go Eliane first and then Ala.
Okay, I hope this is a bit better now. What I wanted to say is that I always say that every choice or decision that we make is an investment in the future. And this speaks to all aspects of life, right? So I'm excited to see in the youth increased awareness about the need for different ways of being in the world, and see them, or us as youth, making choices that are more aligned with our values rather than with societal expectations. And this to me says that we are making decisions from a place of love rather than a place of fear. And this brings me hope. This is something that I look forward to witnessing in my lifetime, seeing how youth bring love into the private sector and operate from that place rather than from a place of fear and scarcity.
That's perfect. That does actually bring a lot of hope. I think that's something for all of us to keep in mind, to be operating from love instead of scarcity and fear. Ala, do you have any thoughts to add?
Okay, so what I wanted to say is that the potential of nature-based solutions has not yet been fully unleashed to the public and to the private sector. So we will lose the fight against climate change if we do not evolve nature. So now is the time for young people to start speaking about the NBS, and we need to expand our understanding about the value of nature-based solutions. So all levels of governments and the private sector need a greater appreciation for and awareness of the potential for nature-based solutions. So more awareness is needed about the value of natural assets and the far-reaching effects that their loss could have on our societies and in our economies. Thank you, Ina.
Thank you. Khyati, do you have something to add?
Sure. Just the last couple of thoughts for our listeners. I think it's important for youth to be part of dialogues like these. Make your priorities heard loud and clear. Somebody mentioned, like big oil companies are finding it difficult to find young people to work with them. I think that proves the point that we are making here, that they need to align with our values, with our priorities. The other thing is that, one is like building careers and sustainability, like some of our panelists are doing, but then also, you can build sustainability in your careers. We understand the intersectionality of climate issues. So everything that we do, all the fields, career trajectories that we are following, we can really build sustainability within that and lead from there. The other thing is that for our business leaders and our private sector entities, I think see young people as their allies. As Sarah mentioned, they should see us as resources as well. So I think current and future employees should be a critical part of the roadmap for a more successful business and sustainable future. Our businesses should put resources behind this to support the youth, to help themselves, to help their companies to achieve their targets.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that we need to work more on helping businesses become aware of the thoughts, ideas, knowledge that young people hold, and our vision and hope for the future. And Loic, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that as well. And we've been talking about it a bit in the chat. So I was hoping you could also share with the group here some more ideas about that.
More ideas about what? I don't think I caught that. Sorry.
About how we can further allow for youth ideas to be brought to the table in companies, especially regarding issues like greenwashing and like the co-opting of the NBS narrative, the nature-based solutions narrative. How can we make sure that youth voices are brought back to the table?
Right. I would say a first point, and it's something that I tried to actually do and was able to accomplish at the McGill University where I did my undergrad studies, is to try to implement systemic change, I think, within the education that we have. So at university, I know that the Desautels Faculty of Management, where I was at, their management faculty, what they propose in terms of sustainability sort of within what we were studying in business was somewhat limited at times. And for example, there was no class or no course around sustainable finance. And so it was working with teachers both from the finance department and the sustainability department, as well as working with the responsible investing professionals working in the community here in Montreal, that we were able to create a curriculum, a course that was able to introduce these topics to students. And I think that helping bridge, I think that gap where there's the business sector traditionally, and there's where sustainability needs to be headed. Bridging that gap to say, well, there's a real business case to be made here, and youth and education is a part of that. And I say systemic change because this will impact multiple generations of students coming in. I think finally on that point, it's understanding that there are career opportunities within the private sector that are 100% aligned with sustainability and in which you can really effectuate change from the inside. I hope, because that's what I'm trying to do on my end. It's important, and it's also by working with the private sector that you also do have access to some boards of directors, some management level positions, to have conversations with them about what they are doing in terms of environmental, social issues, and where you can ask those questions of, is this greenwashing, is this social washing or not, and sort of tapping into that.
Thank you for sharing. And Alice, I know that you've been working as well in the energy sector, on engineering. I'm wondering what you see as hope for the future and engaging young people and helping to solve these climate and biodiversity crises.
Hello. So I see young people as a protagonist in building a more sustainable world. The work of young people with innovative ideas, for example, in the private sector, is a solution for a market focused on, for example, preserving nature and mitigate climate change. So is that. Thank you very much.
Yeah. We have about 5 more minutes. Wondering if anybody else has any takeaways. Anton, you haven't had a chance to speak yet in this session. Do you have any takeaways or any hope for the future that you can share with us?
Yeah, sure. What I would I would say that we need the pressure of the consumers, especially in my domain, where the food domain, is the consumer that decide what the market is. And I think that's also why I want to have this pedagogical incentive program, because we want to try to motivate people to go in the right way. Sorry for my English. In the right way. And if it doesn't work like this, I think that we entrepreneurs have an opportunity by offering products that are the right way. I don't know if you understand. If it doesn't go naturally, try to engage people by offering the right products. So we try to have a better, how to say, impact in this way. So that's my hope. So the pressure of consumer, and the more we are, and the better it will be, the bigger the impact will be. So yeah, that would be my world.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's something that all people can do regardless of their age, is use the power of the dollar, the power of their spending to try to influence the private sector and do their research, figure out where greenwashing is happening and where social washing is happening, and make sure to cut through that. So I think it's all about education, communication, like you said, Anton, like doing the best you can to choose and or create, like you're doing, create products that are more sustainable and push us towards a more just future. So thank you so much, everyone, for all of your insights. This has been a really great discussion. It was really great to get such a diversity of perspectives and such great participation from the audience as well. We will be engaging more in the future as the Youth for Nature Private Sector Task Force. We'll be having a follow-up session to continue engaging with this. And Youth for Nature does have another session coming up as well. So keep an eye out for that. We also have more ways to engage with Youth for Nature. We have relaunched our storytelling campaign. So please reach out to us on social media. We are at Y for Nature on all social media, or you can reach us at our website, youthfornature.org, to contribute to the storytelling campaign. Follow us on social media, sign up for our newsletter. And we also have a form available for you to fill out to share what you thought of today's session, what we can do to improve in the future, what you would like to see from us in the future. We would like to continue engaging on discussions such as this. It was really great to hear everybody's feedback on the session so far and all of the questions, all of our great speakers. So thank you so much to everybody who has participated in this session. It was such a great discussion, and we look forward to working with you again in the future.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, the speakers, for taking the time to join us today. And we really hope to see you in the future, continuing the discussion we started.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Have a great rest of your day or evening, everybody. I am going to close out the webinar now. If anybody has any other questions or feedback, feel free to reach out to us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all of the channels. We also have our website, youthfornature.org, or you could reach us at our email, hello@youthfornature.org, and we will be sure to get in touch. Thank you, everybody, for a great discussion. Look forward to engaging with you in the future.